This is Transformation Ground Control, your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello and welcome to Transformation Ground Control, the podcast that is intended to help you through your transformation journey, whether you're going through a digital transformation, a business transformation, a organizational change, operational changes, merger and acquisition, whatever sort of transformation your business might be going through. This podcast is intended to help you through that process. And real quickly, before I introduce our co-host, just wanted to talk about what the purpose of the podcast is. And as we'll talk about here in a few minutes, there's a lot of content that we put out as an organization related to YouTube content and blogs and things of that nature. But we don't really have any content that focuses on a deeper dive case study approach to understanding transformation. And so this podcast is designed to bring in guests that will help us unpack and uncover and understand through case studies what it takes to be successful in transformation journeys. In today's episode, we're going to have three guests with us. We're going to have Brian Potts, who is going to talk with us about trends in 2021. We also have Daryl Crockett from Third Stage Consulting, who will chat with us about cybersecurity and in particular the SolarWinds breach that affected a lot of organizations throughout the world in late 2020. And then finally, we'll have an interview with Nate Stroher and Braden Gerbig from Third Stage Consulting, and we'll be doing a deep dive case study of a medical device company that we're working with at Third Stage, and we're helping them define their digital transformation strategy and their digital strategy for the 2021 and beyond. So we're going to talk to Nate and Braden about what it takes to make those sorts of engagements or strategic roadmaps successful. So that's what to expect here in today's session. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, YouTube, whatever your favorite podcast provider might be. So I encourage you to please subscribe to the channel. So as I mentioned, my name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients through their digital transformation journeys. And I'm here with Paresa Noble from Third Stage Consulting as well. Paresa, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And so, Paresa, one of the things that we had talked about, you and I have talked about this, is the reason we wanted to do this show, and the reason you and I are hosting the show together is because we wanted to do more of a deep dive analysis of case studies and do more of a sort of a lessons from the front lines, people that are actually going through transformations right now and getting the good, the bad, the ugly, and all that good stuff, uncovering that and unpacking that in these conversations. And really a bit different than some of the other content that we put out, on YouTube and through our blogs, maybe a little bit less conceptual, a little bit less academic, and more focused on tactical initiatives that can be done here. So that's really the purpose of the podcast. And I guess to start, before we dive into our first guest, 2020 was a crazy year, right? I imagine you may have found that to be the same. Unusual year, right?
Absolutely. I mean, who hasn't felt the pain and discomfort that 2020 brought? But I mean, I'm a firm believer that through discomfort, you find growth, right? And I think a lot of companies, a lot of leaders, a lot of people, both professionally and personally, saw a lot of growth in 2020. That's for sure.
Yep. A lot of growth, a lot of unanticipated growth too. I think it was growth in a way that a lot of people maybe didn't plan for or predict. And here we are in a new year already, thinking ahead to what do we do for this year? What's going to be, what's going to
exactly. Be I feel like if we weren't already in the digital era, then 2020 definitely pushed everybody into the digital era, adopting the internet more than ever before, whether that's, through working remotely, through taking your operations online, doing sales on e-commerce. There's been a lot of pivots in how people are running their businesses, running their teams, et cetera. So definitely a year for the books, that's for sure.
Yeah, and there's when we think of the lessons from 2020, the year 2020, and how it applies to 2021, that's really where it's probably a good place to start. In our first inaugural episode of Transformation Ground Control is really looking at 2020 and what are some of those lessons, and what can we do different going forward, and what are the trends to be aware of. So I know you had some questions or some thoughts around that. Maybe I'll let you kind of dive into some of those talking points or some of those lessons from 2020.
Sure. Absolutely. I would say, I think the biggest stick that we're going to see from 2020 is the concept of working remotely. Again, companies adopting the digital era more than they ever have before and pushing their teams to work remotely. And with that comes with a handful of different conversations that I'm excited about our guests today, because they're going to be diving into that. But you look at operations, both internally and externally. So, how is your team working remotely? What softwares are you using to enable that? Do you have an e-commerce strategy? That whole thing, I'm excited for Brian, because I think he's going to dive into that. But then it also poses the conversation of cybersecurity. And if we have all of our employees working remotely on their own networks, on their own laptops, what does that mean for cyber threats in the new year and beyond, right? And I think the biggest reason why I think working remotely is going to stick is because, the writing's on the wall. You have, for example, Salesforce acquiring Slack and betting $28 billion on the fact that working remotely is here to stay. One of the biggest reasons why they acquired Slack is because they wanted to embrace the digitization of the economy. According to Brett Taylor, he's their COO. He said, the world after COVID will be a lot different than it was in 2019. And it is enabling people to sell from anywhere, provide customer service from anywhere. So this whole concept of being nimble and flexible, I think all of that, yes, hopefully we will turn the page on COVID this year, but I don't know that we'll ever really turn the page on going back into the office, going back fully brick and mortar. We got to embrace it, right?
Yeah, and it sort of seems like it just fast-tracked a trend that was already starting to develop. I think a lot of companies were thinking about, how can we be more effective and more flexible and leverage, a remote workforce, and they were sort of dipping their toe in that whole process. And a lot of employees, I think a lot of the workforce is pushing for that because it's convenient and it gives us better work-life balance and all that good stuff. But COVID really just fast-tracked that. It sort of put it on a accelerated approach to getting to that point.
Absolutely. And your team, we are always talking about digital transformation, right? And I think that word is such a big word because it's more than just transforming your, software and how you operate online, but it's really kind of a business transformation. And you actually posted a YouTube video about that. What is digital transformation? So I guess this buzzword, it really picked up in 2020, but I'm curious if you want to elaborate on what exactly is digital transformation and how has that kind of evolved, especially today as we go into 2021?
Yeah, it's funny as you were asking that question, it gave me flashbacks to when, do you remember in March when you first found out that you couldn't go anywhere and you were staying home and this COVID thing was a big deal? Do you still remember that?
Yes. How could you forget?
It seems like so long ago, but it really wasn't that long ago. But I still remember just being, to be candid, I had a sense of panic. Like I thought, oh my gosh, like this is not going to be good for our business. That's the first thing I thought is, first you get past the point of, wow, what does this mean? I can't go out and do whatever I want to do. I have to stay home. And oh, by the way, what's this going to do to our business? And we saw a lot of companies that I'd say for probably 4 to 6 weeks where a lot of our clients just put stuff on hold. They said, well, hold on, we're taking a timeout on everything because we're trying to figure out, what this world's going to look like. So there's a few weeks there. It was pretty stressful for, I think, a lot of people. And for us as a business, it was stressful. But then you realize that, a lot of organizations they weren't just going to sit around and do nothing. They may have put stuff on hold for a few weeks, but then they ended up kind of going back, and it was amazing to me how many organizations and teams just sort of figured it out, and they did so without much fear or skepticism or trepidation or whatever you want to call it. They sort of just dived in and said, okay, well, this is the new world we're in, so we're going to move forward with our transformation. It looks a lot different now because we're managing a remote team, and our definition of transformation and digital transformation may have changed now as a result. But it was amazing to me how quickly companies made that shift and that pivot. And it was amazing to me too how much urgency that organizations seem to have after COVID. It's almost like they had to make up for lost time, or they knew they were doing a pivot, and so they needed to really double down on that pivot and really focus on this new way of working, the new normal, whatever you want to call it. So I don't know that answers your question of what is digital transformation, but maybe it's more what is digital transformation today versus what was it before, and it looks quite a bit different than it did a year ago.
Exactly. Did you see companies kind of rushing a little bit after COVID came to get their new ERP systems up and running?
Yeah, it's a good question. In some cases, yes. We saw some organizations that were being forced to rush, which, this is the part I didn't really anticipate when I was in that panic mode of, oh, shoot, what's going to happen to our business, and are there still going to be transformations out there happening in order for us to help with? As we were working through that, I realized quickly that, wow, there's actually a lot of companies that are not only being forced into transformation because they're working remotely and they've got people that aren't able to come into the office or into the facilities as much as they used to, but also they're growing. A lot of food and essential healthcare types of businesses actually were, I don't want to say they benefited, but they did in many ways. They benefited as a business from COVID and the shutdowns and the way the world changed, and so they ended up fast tracking. In many cases, they have to do something different because they just can't grow and scale and keep up demand. So in those cases, I don't know if rushed is the right word, but they were forced to move at a faster pace than they may have otherwise.
It's interesting because you look at all the, I imagine a lot of different industries felt the pressure on their supply chain, right? I'm sure the toilet paper industry felt it, right? Yeah. So it's interesting to see how that plays into the operations of these companies.
Yeah, I think it exposed, the weaknesses of a lot of supply chains. Even when you think to when China was first dealing with COVID themselves, and there's a lot of restricted trade or restricted flow of goods to and from China. It really forced organizations to think, wow, do we really want our entire supply chain central or focused on China? Should we diversify geographically? It opened up that question of as far as, do we really have a flexible supply chain? And I think a lot of organizations realize, no, we don't. We've got a pretty, we've almost concentrated our risk too much in terms of geography or our dependency on third parties or whatever the case may be.
Right. Yeah, lots of lessons from 2020 that I think will really shift how businesses, industries, really the full scope operates, whether it be sourcing, inventory, manufacturing, or, how they operate their own software. Yeah,
absolutely. And, another trend, or I guess I'd say a takeaway from 2020 going into 2021, and I think you might be too young to appreciate this, to fully appreciate this, unlike me, is Cobra Kai. I mean, on Netflix. I think you and I have talked about these. You haven't seen Cobra Kai, have you?
I haven't. I honestly haven't even heard of it.
Oh, you haven't?
I haven't. I need to get on board.
I think it's probably because you're sort of you're in this demographic where you're not old enough to have remembered the Karate Kid, back from the 80s, and your kids aren't old enough yet to appreciate the subplots with kids in the show. But it's a great show. It's all the rage. My kids love it. It's sort of a continuation of the Karate Kid, if you ever heard of it. It's a series that builds on Karate Kid. It has a lot of the original characters. They're obviously much older now, but there's kids. There's sort of a next generation of fighters that are telling some good stories, fighting some good karate, and it's just a really good show. So that's one of my big takeaways from 2020 to 2021 is it gave me an opportunity. When combined with the fact that I got COVID right at the start of this year, I was bedridden for a certain amount of time, so I had the opportunity to binge watch the show, all 3 seasons, and it's a really fascinating show. So it has nothing to do with transformation. I'm sure we could stretch and make some sort of connection, but I just thought that was worth noting as well. It's a great show.
I got to check it out for sure. Hey, the silver linings of, I guess, getting COVID is you get to binge watch a good show. That's good.
Yeah, and Netflix, I think that's why Netflix's stock is doing so well, is they've got a captive audience with people staying home and many people being sick as well.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Well, good. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be with Brian Potts, who, speaking of Cobra Kai, I know he's a fan, and he's a fan of karate and Cobra Kai, and we're not going to talk about Cobra Kai with him. We're going to talk about trends in 2021. So building on this conversation of lessons learned from 2020, we're going to chat about that with Brian when we come back from a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Okay, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Paresa Noble. My name is Eric Kimberling. Again, if you'd like to subscribe to the show, you can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, whatever podcast platform of choice you'd like. And I'm excited to have a guest here with us here today, our first of three guests or three interviews we're going to have on today's episode. And Brian Potts is the managing partner and chief operating officer, or I'm sorry, chief client officer. He used to be the chief operating officer. Now he's the chief client officer at Third Stage Consulting. And Brian and myself actually started Third Stage Consulting together. And we actually, prior to Third Stage, worked at my previous company that I had started. We worked there for about 10 years together. So Brian's someone I know very well. We actually went to college together. We've known each other for 25 plus years. And we've been in this space working together now for probably, I'd say 12 or 15 years now. So the reason I wanted Brian on the show is not only is he a great guy and interesting to talk to, but because as we think about 2021 trends and where the transformation and digital space is headed, he's got a really good handle on what the market is demanding and where the market is heading. He's the one that typically will talk to new clients first. He's sort of the front line as new clients approach us for help with their transformations. And we'll look forward to that conversation. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and introduce Brian to the show. Brian, thanks for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So happy New Year.
Yes.
Brand new year. I think a lot of us are anxious for 2020 to be over and looking forward to a new year. And since you're, as our chief client officer, one of your roles at Third Stage is to interact with a lot of different potential clients, and you're sort of on the front end of talking to clients even before they become clients and learning what their challenges are and what kind of things they're going through. So I want to talk to you a bit today about what you're seeing in the industry, what kind of trends you see emerging, how you think things will be different in 2021. But before we get into that, if you were to look back at 2020, what are some of the lessons, even though we all want to forget it and move on, but what are some of those lessons from 2020 that we can take with us going into the new year here?
Yeah, I think from a digital perspective, the biggest lesson learned is flexibility and willingness to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. And I think that's going to be relevant ongoing. Hopefully we don't have another COVID coming around, although there's rumors of that. But I think what we're learning from a business perspective and surrounding technology is that the ability to change to quick changing environments is extremely valuable, and technology allows you to do that. Those that were prepared, for example, for e-commerce heading into 2021, were in a far better position come March, April last year. So I think probably my biggest observation is, leave some room for flexibility, changing market conditions. And with the availability of technology that's coming, it allows us to quickly adapt to, and, keep market advantage and change direction quickly.
And it's interesting how, when the pandemic first started in early 2020, it seemed like the magnitude of change would be sort of focused on remote workforces and dealing with that sort of flexibility of how do you manage a workforce in the pandemic. And that certainly is a point of flexibility that's important. But even just general business models and supply chains and how companies operate in general seems like it's been pretty significantly impacted in a number of different industries. Would you agree with that? Or are you seeing anything different?
No, that's spot on. It changed. You're right. It changed business model. You look at hospitality, restaurants. The way they do business is completely different. Several of them have unfortunately gone out of business, but there's a whole lot that are doing very well right now because of their ability to adopt and change.
Yeah, and even companies that you don't think of as like a retailer or a B2C or business to consumer type of business, even those types of businesses like B2B and industrial type of companies are forced to change in a lot of ways they might not have imagined, like providing more e-commerce type of capabilities or just interacting with their customers differently. So I think it's really interesting and probably something that could be a good thing for longer term, having that flexibility that you talked about.
Yeah. And the surrounding aspects of what the supply chain disruption and work from home and everything culminating has caused just trails of changes in almost every industry.
Right. Yeah, very true. So as we look forward to 2021, then what are some of the broader trends that you think organizations should be aware of as they plan out their digital or business transformations in the new year?
I think we just hit on a number of them, starting with the concept of e-commerce, those that are not currently utilizing the ability to sell products and services over the internet, finding ways to remotely deliver their products are going to continue to struggle. But what comes beyond that is it opens up new markets. So once you start looking at e-commerce, how do you it changes the dynamics of buy-sell relationship. So, things like marketing automation. I think we're going to see a boost in those systems and technologies that will allow you to reach out, and that could be a combination of artificial intelligence with mixed with e-commerce and market automation to reach new clients, get people to recognize who you are. Because all of a sudden, if you are a retail store and you're not, you shut down your brick and mortar operations, you've got the ability to sell it anywhere, and you need to do that. You need to open up new markets. So I think finding ways to do that is where people are going to be utilizing a lot of technology. The other thing you mentioned coming on is remote workforce. We are starting to see people going back into the offices, but we're also finding a lot of companies that found some cost savings in having remote workforce, efficiencies, ease of human resources and letting people work from home. So continuing to build, I think, not just the technologies and, the remote connections, but look at security. I think we're going to see a boom in the need for data security. There's going to be increased breaches. I'll call it now. With everybody working from home, it opens up new pockets of opportunity for data hacks everywhere. So we're going to see a probably continued increase there.
Yeah, it's a great point. And in a different segment in the show, we'll have one of our team members here to talk about the SolarWinds breach and some of the risks of cloud computing and technology in general. But you hit on a few really good points there around e-commerce and remote workforces and how to deal with that. And we haven't talked a lot about it, but supply chains. I think at first people were focused more on the supply chain simply because it was so disrupted during the pandemic. And it gets back to that point of flexibility that you made. A lot of organizations are finding that their supply chains need to be more flexible in addition to, the way they interact with their customers and the way they manage their teams as well.
Yeah, well, and on the supply chain front too, you got to look at the customer service end and how frustrated are people when they didn't get their Christmas gifts in time or their holiday gifts. We need, companies that are delivering, especially to consumers, but also to businesses, need to have excellent forecasting and the ability to draw assumptions and data in with their supply chain disruptions. So if all of a sudden that a raw material is going to be delayed, you need to be able to quickly get that into your production schedule and know when your output's going to be impacted. Because if you've got suppliers depending on your products, you're not going to get out on time. They're not going to get to their consumers. You're starting a whole trend of disruption and really ultimately frustrated consumers.
And it seems like a lot of organizations were already struggling with that even before the pandemic, but they were kind of holding it together with spreadsheets and manual processes. But then the pandemic hit and it just kind of exposed some of those inefficiencies and weaknesses. And it seems like that's why a lot of companies now are actually accelerating their transformations and trying to figure out how can we avoid that sort of thing again in the future, whether it's because of a pandemic or macroeconomic trend or something else that we can't predict.
Yeah, I mean, look at what happened to steel prices recently, or lumber going through the roof, and as well as disrupted supply chains. So now you've not only got to monitor your forecasting and delivery and production schedule, but now you've got to look at your pricing models. You've got to be able to quickly vary that, because if you lock in an order on an increase in commodity and you don't have technology to help support that, you could be in a bit of trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to ask you some more questions about trends and things to be thinking about in the new year, particularly as it relates to technology. So we're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be right back with more with Brian Potts.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Okay, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Brian Potts, and we're chatting about trends in 2021 and what you should be expecting headed into this new year as you think about your transformation journey. And just a fun little fact, that transition music coming back from the break, you may recognize the song. It's if you're maybe around the same age as me and used to enjoy 80s rock, that's Iron Maiden song. And the reason I thought it was appropriate to have that song in the transition here is because Brian and I are both fans of that band, and it's music we enjoy together. In fact, we were at a karaoke bar one time, Brian and I, a few years ago, and he, unbeknownst to me, put his song in for me to sing at this karaoke place, and it was Iron Maiden. And if you have ever heard Iron Maiden, the guy has a really high voice, and I have a deep voice, and it was very stressful, and I've never quite forgiven Brian for that. But the joke's on him, because now I get to ask him a bunch of questions that he has to answer. So we're back here with Brian Potts. Now, Brian, before the break, we were talking a bit about remote workforce, as you talked about that being one of the points of flexibility that organizations need to be thinking about, and one of the trends that has emerged here in 2020 leading into 2021. But one of the things that comes to mind as we think about remote workforces is the impact to people and just the amount of change and potential change fatigue that organizations and team members are feeling. How do you see that affecting, or do you see that affecting transformations here in the coming year?
Yeah, that's a great question, because if you look at us as humans, we don't necessarily differentiate one change for another. The more things change, we take that all in as the concept of things are changing, things are disrupting in my life. So what we've gone through in the last year will absolutely have effect. It could be either positive or negative, depending on how we react to it. I think on the positive end, people are used to change. So they're more willing and able to adopt. Those that were all of a sudden one day sent home and said, you're working from home, here's a laptop, get it set up. They've gone through a degree of change, so they're able to do it. On the other end, you've got people who are just so sick and tired of change that they don't want it anymore. We've all got those friends and neighbors who have just balled up and are pretty much ignoring coronavirus. That it doesn't exist, not because they don't believe it, but because they just don't want to deal with it. And we risk that mentality coming into digital transformations. People say, no, I've had enough change. We've already gone through this. I'm not going to make any changes with my technology. So that's going to be I think a significant change management dynamic that we have to work through in the coming years.
Yeah, that's a good point. And what's interesting too is that while we have seen some transformations that have shifted to this remote workforce, and in many cases the whole team for a transformation has been managed remotely, we've seen some end result of that. We've seen some companies actually go live. Some of our clients have actually gone live during this time. But we haven't seen really the big wave of companies that have fully committed to this remote workforce because they've had to, and at the same time they've continued with their transformation. So I'd be curious to see how that affects the end result or the success or failure rate of transformations. But I think it's something to be super mindful of as companies go into transformation, is just recognizing that people are already so impacted by change, even without you doing anything new with a more formal transformation. So it's something to be aware of. So if we shift gears a little bit away from people and talk about technologies, what are some of the more common technologies or trends that you're seeing from more of a technical side for businesses and organizations as we enter 2021?
Yeah, so following up on the kind of the coming trends that we talked about, I think e-commerce is already, we've seen a boost. I think that's going to continue. We are surprisingly seeing, initially, call it over the summer, we didn't think we were going to be seeing the number of overall enterprise suite ERP type implementations, but we actually are seeing that because there's so much change. I think it's driven by there's so much change to business that people are seeing rather than try and find these quick hit fixes that tend to build up and cause confusion. There's certainly a few of those that will continue to be needed. I think companies are finally coming to the realization that it's time to just swap out, if they've got legacy ERP and technology, that it might be time to replace that. And I think they've gotten into a flow of the current environment, remote workforce, whatever the case may be, where they're able to adopt that. So I think we're going to actually see more companies adopt ERP. And the other reason for that is just a driving market need. Because technology is becoming available to everybody. For the last 2-3 years, small, mid-sized businesses that weren't able to even look at ERP historically now can implement systems that are built for small business. So we're finding a competitive drive to stay competitive in business. Companies are needing to adopt, those that aren't on ERP are having to adopt it, regardless of COVID or whatever else is going on. So I think that's going to be a continued trend. And then the other interesting point is all these advanced technologies, and this is we talked about some of the market automation. You talk about some of the advanced forecasting, business intelligence, the ability to use and utilize data is going to continue to grow. So interactions with artificial intelligence, robotics, we're seeing it's become more mainstream now. 2 years ago when we talked about this, it was like sort of on the leading edge. It's really not anymore. If you're in an industry where your competitors are, having machines talk to each other and share data, if you're unless you've got a very niche product, you need to start looking at that to stay competitive.
Yeah, very true. Are you seeing any differences in trends or major differences between companies that are different sizes or in different industry verticals? So in other words, when you look at these macro technology trends, is there any differences you're seeing among different types of organizations?
Well, we've still got so you look at the essential businesses, those that were greatly impacted, and we're still seeing some differences there. Most of those early last year took on quick hit, low hanging fruit, some core technologies that would help them transfer, remote workforces were needed, increase their production capacity, build out, we saw some people busting down walls to build out warehouses so you could have social distancing. Now those companies are needing to call it more enterprise level technology to bring all those little pieces together. So they might have, brought in a new HCM to handle some remote workforce. They might have modified their supply chain and forecasting modules, and they've got a bunch of different pieces that aren't necessarily communicating or working effectively. It's now time to bring that all together, because what we saw is a lot of companies didn't take the time to strip down and define a digital strategy before they just started buying technology and fixing these quick hit needs, which they had to do. But now it's time to bring efficiency into that. Make sure everything's talking to each other, look at where data is being stored and communicated, because I think we're going to start to see some disruption from those, call it those rapid purchases and implementations.
Yeah, it's a great point. On one hand, it's somewhat refreshing to see organizations that are acting with a renewed sense of urgency and they aren't stalling. And we saw it, probably starting around summertime, where it seemed like clients we were working with were really operating with that heightened sense of urgency, and they had more motivation to get moving on these transformations. But there's a risk I think you're identifying there, which is you don't want to just jump in head first without having a clear plan or vision and taking that time to prepare and mobilize and all that good stuff that's important to success. So when you look at organizations that are going through some sort of transformation in 2021, what would you say are the top 3 keys to success that you'd recommend for an organization going through that sort of change in the new year?
Yeah, so the first one we just talked about is creating a digital strategy. Don't start adopting technology unless you've got a roadmap built out. And the reason for that is there's so much available. You look 10, 15 years back, and you knew you needed technology. It was pretty straightforward on what was available in the market. You kind of knew it's a matter of, let's get an ERP, either we're ready for it or we're not. Anymore, you've got, that's just one small option of what you can do. You could look at changing out your HCM system. You could look at CRM. You could look at any aspect of, call it your enterprise suite of applications and that architecture. You need to have an outline for what that looks like, so that when you purchase something and implement it, it fits into the bigger picture. Otherwise, what we're just talking about is you're going to have a bunch of pieces, and this was occurring far before 2020, is companies were just buying all this new stuff because it looked cool and it worked for an individual or organization or functional area. But when you compile it together under the enterprise umbrella, they don't fit together. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, as you do that, make sure that you've got alignment across, especially the executive leadership of the organization, because what's happening is we're risking with this, quick change and everybody's moving forwards. We're risking some siloing of operations. Sales will run off on their own and do this, and human resource will run off their own and do this, and operations will run off and do their own thing. And we need to make sure that the leaders of the organization are talking, that they're in alignment on, and that should be focused, like you always talk about, business strategy aligning with digital strategy. So we need to make sure that it comes from a business perspective, that where the business is going as an organization and strategic drive, and then fit technology to that, rather than just going out and buying technology and hope it works. So that level of alignment and called executive support would be the second thing. And I think the third is to keep that an edge of flexibility, and that goes from the willingness to change that plan. So once you set a digital strategy, that's a starting plan. It's not set in stone. You have to be able to adapt to changing conditions, like we saw in 2020. We don't think and hope they won't be as dramatic, but with the availability of new technologies, with the changing market conditions, you need to have willingness to change your strategy and also the associated budget. And that's a big one, is if you get board approval and sign off on X number of dollars, make sure that X number of dollars includes some buffer, some contingency to make changes to that digital strategy. Because if you have to go back through that whole approval process again, you're going to be behind the times when it finally gets approved and you look to implement.
Yeah, those are great points. And I think, in this environment we're in, where companies are in some ways in more of a command and control mode, just because they're reacting with that sense of urgency, it gets easy to forget about your strategy or how well aligned you are. It's certainly addressing flexibility is important too. So those are really good takeaways. And I notice you haven't talked about none of those three things you recommended were specific to technology. It's really about broader issues than the technology itself, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's not nothing new that you need to select the right technology. That hasn't changed since, the day technology was invented. But, for the coming year, it's more around the business and how you adopt to that technology.
Well put, and that's a good place to leave it for companies that are planning their strategies for the new year. We're about out of time. I want to thank you for your time, Brian. Thanks for your feedback. This has been really helpful.
Thanks for having me, and Happy New Year.
Yep, Happy New Year. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll chat with you soon.
Great. Thank you.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Never stressed. Got that sunshine on my Sunday best.
All right, so very interesting conversation, some interesting thoughts Brian had as we look ahead to the new year.
Yeah, he had some amazing points. I mean, everything that we chatted about from the beginning of this conversation, whether that be pushing your products online and embracing e-commerce or taking your team remote, a lot of really good identifiers as to what 2021 holds. I think one thing that's interesting that he talked about was the quick ERP implementation. So I'm curious on your thoughts. Do you think that's going to lead to an increased risk of more ERP failures as we venture into 2021?
Yeah, it's a good question. I do think it will, and I agree with you in what Brian was saying about that too, in that the question you asked me earlier before the interview with Brian was about, this, or we were talking about that heightened sense of urgency and how companies were moving more aggressively now as a result of COVID, either because they are making up for lost time or because they may be an essential business that is seeing an increase in demand, or their supply chain had some weaknesses they had to shore up. Whatever the case may be, there's a lot of urgency and sort of aggressive pushing to transformation, which could be a good thing, you could argue, but there's a risk there in that companies oftentimes will rush so much that they cut corners, they don't think strategically, they don't think ahead, they're just sort of like in execution mode. Let's just go fix stuff, let's go put in new technology, let's change our processes or whatever. And they don't, put a lot of thought into, what the right approach is. So I agree with you. I think that creates a new risk of, a whole new wave of potential failures in the transformation space.
And I'm curious, we're talking about everybody going remote and doing everything online. So obviously a lot of ERP solutions come in the cloud, right? So does that kind of pose another risk as we start talking about cybersecurity? Like you have your teams already working remotely on their own networks, et cetera, but then adding that layer of cloud, does that help or hurt the cybersecurity space when it comes to making sure your data is safe?
Yeah, I think there's probably two layers to that. And actually, our next guest is going to be Daryl Crockett, who's an expert in this space. So she's probably a better one to ask that, and we'll ask that question when she's on. But I would think that, just based on experience, there's sort of the reality of whether or not that's creating new risks. And, I could argue both sides of the equation. On one hand, I tend to think that in general, when you look at cloud providers, cloud technology providers, whether they're providing ERP software or just cloud infrastructure, whatever the case may be, those companies are heavily incentivized and have a lot to lose by not providing world-class security and protecting their customers' data. And if they have a breach, it's a big deal. Their entire business is at risk. So that's one argument, for increased security and increased comfort with with cloud providers. But there's this whole SolarWinds hack thing that happened, in late 2020. I think it was in December that happened, where a lot of Fortune 500 companies and U.S. government entities were attacked by people that didn't attack their systems directly, but they attacked SolarWinds, which was a backdoor into a lot of these infrastructures and systems for pretty large organizations. So the reason I bring that up is, even though on one hand vendors are more likely to be able to tighten up security better than the average mom and pop organization, on the other hand, they're bigger targets, and there's more aggressive attacks on those companies oftentimes. And when there is a breach, it creates a perception of vulnerability with cloud providers, and whether or not that's a justified perception or not, I guess, is a different story. So I guess I could argue. I know I'm not really giving you a clear-cut answer, because I feel like there's conflicting opinions or conflicting reasons to be for or against this whole cybersecurity cloud world that we're in right now.
Right. I mean, it's just crazy to see. It's such a blessing, right, as we keep progressing our technology, but it's also kind of scary, because you look at things like, keeping up with your passwords and having the VPN. That's like the bare minimum these days. These hackers are so complex, and there's so many different ways that they could access data, that you really have to have your cybersecurity game strong. So I think Brian made a really good point in identifying that. And then also, another side note question that I've been wondering is, with this adoption of working remotely, do you think that the values of commercial real estate are going to are going to take a hit? Because, I mean, are companies going to take their teams back to the office after this is all said and done? Or do you think that, will it ever be the same as it was pre-COVID?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I tend to think that anytime there's a extreme reaction to anything in the world, usually the pendulum kind of swings back and settles somewhere in the middle. And it may be that we were too focused on office time and office work in the past, and we may be over adjusting right now and saying, well, let's just have everyone be remotely because we have to, because of the pandemic. And the reality is I imagine that pendulum will probably settle somewhere in the middle, where maybe we're not completely 100% remote, but maybe it's more of a flexible work environment and more of a hybrid. So to your point about commercial real estate, yeah, I would think, I'm not a big betting person. I don't invest in commercial real estate, but it's probably not a space I would start off investing in now.
Yeah, wouldn't start today. I'm curious to see how that plays out. But then, going back to the cybersecurity piece, is your team safer if they are on network in the office?
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, because now you've got the security of not just your own, call it your IT department, the IT department within your four walls, but then you've got people accessing your infrastructure from their homes, which may not be as secure as your office. So it's a really good point, something to think about, and that's something that we're actually going to dive into with our next guest, Daryl Crockett, who is the VP of Data and Security at Third Stage Consulting, and she is passionate about this stuff. And the reason I like talking to Daryl and having Daryl on the show is that whenever she talks about this stuff, whether it's data and security, which, by the way, are two areas of weakness of mine, those are areas I'm not very strong in. And the reason I like talking to Daryl is because she has such passion for it. And when she talks about data and security, she does so in a way that's very, she brings some pretty complex concepts down to a layperson's level. So for example, I can understand it. So that's why I like talking to her. So I'm excited to have our next guest on the show, Daryl Crockett. So Daryl, thanks for joining the show today.
Well, glad to be here, Eric. It's a pleasure as usual.
So to get started, what exactly is SolarWinds, and why was this breach that they experienced, why is it such a big deal?
This particular breach with SolarWinds, and this really is better described as a global event. And it really marks the beginning of a whole new phase of cyber attacks that we're going to see in our new world. As if 2020 wasn't fun enough, now we're engaging in a whole new level of virus of sorts, but this one is, of course, a cyber virus. And what's really unique about this, and wanted to point this out to our listeners that this is what's most important about this is a global event of nation state cyber attacks. Okay, so this is most likely one of our top three, and I'll let you speculate on which country it was or read your own. But this is a state-sponsored attack where money invested by a government in equipment and training and recruiting and curating of resources for a very long range, well-planned attack, primarily on the United States. Other countries are affected, but it was primarily a United States attack. And what has happened in this attack is that they've used the standard vehicle that many companies use in order to do the updates for their software and equipment. So, every time that you get that little clock in the bottom of your screen and it says, oh, there's an update ready to go. Well, that's a Microsoft update. Now, although Microsoft was affected by this, apparently not the Microsoft updates that we all experience in our Windows operating system. But similar to that, corporations use SolarWinds to deploy updates for their software to their customers. And a lot of companies use it. So what happened was the nation state bad actors hacked into SolarWinds and then put in a Trojan that activated a series of programs back in their systems. And what they were doing is they were going and using that entry point of a software update, which all the computers are designed to allow in. And then once it's in, it then went and started to look for people inside these companies that had access to security programs within the company. So they went in and they looked for, well, inside each company that we deployed into, who are those persons who have the ability to allow us access to more of the networks within the company. And then once they were able to steal those credentials and fake that they were the security people within these organizations, how ironic is that, then they would go in and have access to all kinds of programs, really any program and data within the company that they were attacking. So imagine they rode in on a big Trojan horse whose purpose was brilliantly to go into all these important companies around the globe, and particularly in the United States, and then in there then deployed more that went in to be able to go in and get the keys to the castle and start getting control of systems inside these companies. So that's the basic premise of what has happened here.
So what's the point? I guess I'll ask you to think like a hacker or a nefarious actor for a moment, but why would you hack a system like SolarWinds, and what would you want to do by trying to get into these other systems through the back door? What's the purpose? What are they stealing? What are they trying to get?
Yeah, in this case, they're in a nation state sponsored attack. They're probably looking for intellectual property. And customer lists, maybe not so much. It's not so much about financial gain, but it's about stealing intellectual property or gaining an advantage of information about a company itself. So they're not looking, unlike cyber criminals who are looking for extorting money. It's all usually financial gain for that. This is really a form of war. In a way, and it's definitely geared toward stealing commercial and governmental, and that's another thing that's interesting about this, governmental intellectual property. That would be what we would guess to be their motives.
And it sounds like from what you're saying, even though larger organizations within the United States were the ones that were the primary targets from what we understand, it sounds like no one's really safe from this. It sounds like smaller organizations, even organizations outside the U.S., could be potential targets for these sorts of attacks. Is that true?
Yeah, when you look at the map, it's quite interesting. It seems concentrated primarily in the United States and in the UK. There's some in Mexico, but there have been Microsoft has helped in kind of detecting where these breaches have occurred. And when you look at the map, it seems to be pretty much centered around the United States, but we do see our European partners also affected. And in terms of the businesses, I think governments are a big attack target here. There's a lot of information about obviously defense and all the other things that governments do. And I think particularly of interest is the vaccine delivery and any healthcare, any intellectual property associated with any type of data or development stages that we have going on. That would seem to be something that would be a target as well. Don't know for sure because they're not coming forward and telling us what was hacked at each company, but that would certainly be a trend that we see here in this wonderful time that we're in at the end of 2020. But are smaller businesses affected? Maybe if they used this software, but by now they should know that they use SolarWinds or they didn't use SolarWinds to do that. Primarily, it's a larger company that would engage in that, but other companies that might use software from companies that deploy their patches to their customers through SolarWinds would be impacted too. But by now, hopefully, you should have found out from SolarWinds that you were a victim of the problem that they had occur.
Right. So what about those listeners who I assume there's a lot of them that aren't using SolarWinds? I'm sure some are, but there's probably a majority, I would guess, that aren't using SolarWinds. Is this a concern for companies that don't use SolarWinds or maybe have never been attacked or had some sort of major security breach in the past, or is it something we should all be worried about or thinking about?
I think we should all be worried, Eric, and because SolarWinds is just the largest, most concentrated effort that we've seen so far. And I think as we move forward, there's another, the nation state of the top 4 countries, there's about 14 that engage, and frankly, one of them is the United States as well. We have our own arsenal. It is a weapon of war of sorts. But in addition to the nation state hacking, which is disturbing for sure, there's also another thing called the PSOA. And the PSOA is the private sector offensive actors, and that is really organized groups of well-funded companies now that engage in cyber crime activity and hacking. And what's interesting is it's now estimated to be a $12 billion market. And these companies are becoming mercenaries to those nation states and other nation states who might not have the resources or the time to launch a cyber war attack on their neighbors, but they can hire these PSOAs, the private sector offensive actors, to work for them, to be their army, to go out and attack certain industries, certain countries, certain individuals. And that is probably the scariest thing because you can have a relationship with a nation state and maybe in diplomacy, we can say we're going to put sanctions against a country, but it's very difficult to sanction an elusive group of companies who do this for profit, either for their own gain directly by doing ransomware or some sort of exfiltration of data and selling that data, medical records or customer records, that kind of thing. It's very difficult to find these people and to prosecute these people. So we should all be concerned.
Right.
Because this is what we're seeing now, particularly during COVID. You think, cut the world a break here. We've got big problems. And yet, what do we see? The biggest increase in cyber criminal activity that we've ever seen, huge spikes. And so we should all be concerned about that. So I don't want people to think that, oh, we didn't use SolarWinds, so therefore we're not affected, or we're not a big company, so therefore we're not affected. No, you are more at risk than as a business. And I can assure you that more people, more companies have been affected than even think. There's a thing called dwell time. And dwell time is the amount of time that occurs between an infiltration of the malware, the virus, or whatever methods they're using to get in, and when you actually become aware of their presence. And these dwell times are going longer and longer, meaning that these criminals are inside your systems, inside your data, for a lot longer than you think before you ever detect them. And that's really scary. Very scary. And, I know I've been on before and I've talked about it. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, that we're all at risk.
Yeah, it's a sobering point. And, you mentioned a couple things I want to come back to. One is, in this COVID post-pandemic world, you have a lot of remote workers and people accessing systems remotely, whereas before COVID, more of those employees were kind of within your four walls and you had a little bit more control and visibility to it. Do you think is that part of the reason why the cyber attacks are on the rise?
I think that maybe people lost their jobs and now they're turning to cybercrime or joining on. I also do think we've kind of like exposed the underbelly of our infrastructure. IT is very distracted supporting remote work right now, and that's going to continue for a period of time for sure. And the ability of these attacks to occur because we have people working on home networks, we're blurring the lines, we're using our home laptops to shop for Christmas gifts, and also go on and log into our systems. We're still able to, in many cases, use our personal laptops for business, or use our business laptops for personal things. And it should be either or. You shouldn't be able to use if you're truly serious and you have data and you're allowing your employees to go onto your network, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to harden their environments and their home environments to make it safe for them to connect to corporate networks and databases and share files and SharePoints. And all of that is now exposed because people aren't protected by that bubble of the security that you get when you're in a corporate environment. And yeah, you're on the Wi-Fi, but that's a protected Wi-Fi if you're in an office. Once you remove from that, you're protected only by the Wi-Fi and firewalls that your home system might have. And that's a lot more points of entry without as many guards guarding the perimeter as we would have if people were working within a corporate LAN.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, when we come back, we're going to take a quick break. I want to come back to another point you're talking about there with points of entry. I'll ask you a question when we come back after a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control, and we'll be right back with Daryl Crockett.
I'm all right today. You're gonna find a way to cross and you're gonna...
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
All right, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Daryl Crockett. We're talking about cybersecurity and SolarWinds. And before we get back to Daryl, Paresa, you and I had talked about this before, but I think the first part of the interview with Daryl may confirm this. But it's interesting talking to Daryl, but it's also kind of scary, isn't it?
Yeah, every time I hear her talk, I'm like, oh gosh, I need to get it together on the cybersecurity front, because I just learn so many new things every time she speaks. Very enlightening, but terrifying, Me
too. What's especially scary is, I've done a lot of conferences with Daryl, either our own conferences that we've hosted or industry conferences that she and I are both speaking at. And, you get her one-on-one and she'll start asking questions about, how often do you change your password, or, what are the criteria you use for your password? And then you just end up feeling like, wow, I'm just a walking target for a hacker, apparently.
Target, yeah.
She identifies all the things you're doing wrong with security anytime you talk to her about it. So it's terrifying. But
oh, I bet. Yeah, she's smart. I need her to come give me some one-on-one coaching on how to step up my cybersecurity game over here.
Yeah, exactly. She is helping us set up our cybersecurity here at our company to make sure we get that sorted up. So good. Well, without further ado, let's get back to the conversation with Daryl. Daryl, right before the break, you had mentioned that there are multiple points of entry or increasing points of entry due to the pandemic and people working remotely and the trend towards more remote workforces. But I also wanted to ask you about applications themselves. So for businesses that are using technology to run their business, whether it's QuickBooks on the financial side or some sort of enterprise system like SAP or Microsoft Dynamics or Oracle, whatever the case may be, whatever technology companies are using to run their business, oftentimes they have other apps that integrate with those systems. And so back to your point about multiple points of entry and back to the point about SolarWinds and how people got into other systems via SolarWinds, are these different apps and these different bolt-on systems that companies are trending towards using more? Does that expose companies even more now that they're using usually not just one system, but multiple systems to run their business?
Unfortunately, yes. So these application interfaces are probably the largest area of concern that we have in the tech community, that now has been demonstrated over and over again how the data and programs that can move between one application and another are just ripe for bad actors hitching a ride to from systems and along with your data in that interface that's created. And unfortunately, companies have moved more and more to having, what I call like the pickup sticks or the spaghetti sticks integrations between all these systems in order to satisfy their complex business processes. And maybe in the event of migration to cloud systems or bridging the gap in an interim solution while they're going through a major implementation, they're connecting more pipes together as needed to keep their companies up and running. And these are a weak point for any company, really. And there are some things that we can do to help with making that more secure for sure. So maybe some things that folks haven't heard about with regard to new ways to protect the data that's moving from point A to point B. But I think one of the other risks that we have, which you certainly should look at, by the way, but one of the other things is that you don't know, just like a SolarWinds, who's putting what into the other end. You're kind of relying on these packages that give you this API library to use, that somebody hasn't slipped something in there that could cause you a problem. And this is definitely a deep concern for the community, the cyber community, in attempting to protect companies.
Right. Yeah. And one of the observations we've had as a team at Third Stage when we're working with clients, especially during this whole tipping point we've reached of companies wanting to move more towards a cloud-based application infrastructure, is that there's still a perception out there or a fear that there is either a security risk or lack of control, the sort of control that you're giving up by having your systems and your data and everything hosted in the cloud. And that tends to be, anytime you hear An example like, was it AWS? They had an outage just a few weeks ago, or NetSuite on the application side had an outage for a full day or a few hours during peak business hours. Every time you hear something like that, there's a sort of reluctance or a skepticism about the cloud, at least in a subset of the market. But what do you think this sort of breach and risk does to the movement towards cloud, or the use of cloud technologies? Does this affect the adoption rate or the way that companies use cloud technologies, or what are your thoughts there?
Well, I think there's a lot in that question, and I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater for all of the cloud applications that we would use. And frankly, if you do that, you're going to be stuck in a very isolated place, because a lot of companies are utilizing the cloud. But for clients that we do service at third stage, we do hear often that because they're government contractors, or because they have a certain set of circumstances, that they are concerned about using cloud technology. You brought up a great example, Eric, where one outage in a cloud-based system or in a hosted system can take out lots of people, for sure. And that is a weakness of the system. But the benefits of it, of being able to put patches out quickly for security breaches, and being able to apply that very quickly across all of the customers of a cloud-based software application, that's a real benefit too. So I don't want people to lose sight of the fact that there are pluses and minuses. If I had to bet against a massive breach occurring for a large company who makes their living creating this software and selling it to other companies, whether they're paying more attention to cybersecurity than a standalone company with their own hunkered down with their own server, with their one or two IT guys trying to defend themselves against the onslaught of attacks, and what will happen if their company is attacked and and the bad actors gain access to their systems. I'd probably bet on the cloud-based company that does this for a living to have the right staff to be able to put the patches out to protect the system faster than a small team working on a privately, hosted on-premise server.
Yeah, that's well put, and a really good point, that you look at the R&D money and the resources that these big companies have. Companies like Amazon Web Services or AWS, like we just talked about, or SolarWinds or whoever, they've got a lot more resources and money to put into patches and keeping things secure, and they also have a lot more to lose. I mean, that's their entire livelihood, their entire business. So if they go down, it's a big black eye, or a big strike against them when that happens. So they're going to be even more incentivized to make sure it doesn't happen that often.
Absolutely. And more of these larger companies that are taking in client data or processing data or offering these applications, they're moving toward zero trust architecture. And so you're going to see, if you're not annoyed already by the 2-factor and 3-factor authentication that you have to go through, and by the amount of updates that you get, and the fact that sometimes software doesn't work because obviously there's some sort of conflict with your firewall or whatever it is that you're trying to make work. If you're not frustrated already, things are going to get worse. It's not going to get easier to log on to systems. It's not going to get easier to do connectivity. It's going to get harder, and it has to, because it's pretty clear that our existing infrastructure, the way that we are doing business here in the United States and elsewhere, but particularly here in the United States, with a kind of, I'll call it loosey-goosiness and a lack of understanding of what the kinds of threats that we're really up against, companies need to do a lot more to harden up their companies. And I'm talking about companies that are, small and medium-sized businesses. If you rely on your systems in order to make your money, and you're putting data in that you need to have accessible, and you're relying on your systems to keep your customer data secure, or your intellectual property secure, or to even be able to function and make appointments and bookings, if that's important to you, then it should be very important that you protect it. It's like having a car unlocked or with very minimal locks parked in a dangerous place and not having an alarm and not having the kind of security that's available in the market today. It's overwhelming. I know it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot to think about. Now, for organizations that maybe aren't thinking about this, or maybe they haven't thought about this much until this conversation, and here you talk about some of the risks and vulnerabilities of cybersecurity in general, whether you're a small company or large company or US based or not US based, whatever industry you might be in, what are some of the general things that organizations can be doing to hedge against cybersecurity risks like the ones we saw with SolarWinds?
Yeah, I think that people don't really understand all of the locations of their data, their programs, and who is able to access them. We're all guilty of taking files and putting them on I'm looking around for a thumb drive, and then we're all thinking about ways to get our jobs done more efficiently. And I think companies need to start thinking about it from a different perspective. How do we operate in a more secure environment? It really is a mind shift from ease of work and ease of access to information to an entirely different paradigm where it's no longer productivity that is the most important thing in an organization to get to profitability, but it is now security to maintain all the ground that we've made up and all the gains. We need to protect that. So it's when we say, what's the word for this year? I'd like to see everybody say security is there. And within that security, that means, limiting the programs that your employees can have access to based on role-based permissioning, limiting the ability of employees to be able to have access to data sets that aren't within a structured program that is role-based permissioned. That means systems inventories, looking at how your data flows across your organization, looking at how your security programs are configured, if you have them at all, to prevent outside infiltration, looking at the versions that you're on for your type of security programs that you do use, McAfee or whatever else you're using. That you, more importantly, that you have a partner, a technology partner that's there that understands what your business is, how you need to do your business, and then is helping you to stay current, to put in the programs that you need. And I mean software programs, yes, but also programs for training and programs for maybe even white hat hacking, where you're paying for a service for somebody to try to break in and see what they can steal within your organization with your blessing, so that you can find those holes and plug them before the bad actors do. So what can we do? We all know we cannot do passwords that are the same across all of our applications. Your Dunkin' Donuts loyalty card password is not the one you should be using for your login, and yet putting 02, 03, 04, 05 every time they ask you to update your password is not what we mean. There are programs that can hack pretty much any word, normal word based with incremental numbers and special characters in a matter of minutes, and they'll just keep trying your email address against this program that just it's called a brute force attack, and just runs through until it gets lucky with one combination of whatever that it can gather, and just keeps trying and trying. So using programs like LastPass and keychain type of security, password security would be a really good idea to start. But I think also, if you think about where you are today in your business and what you're asking your IT staff to do, if you have any IT staff, dedicated, you're asking them really to make sure that you have accessibility to all your programs, that when people, new users come on, they get a password and ID and an email, that they get this form signed out, that they get maybe a little bit of training here and there. But you're asking your IT staff to do that, as well as keep abreast of every threat that there is out there and be able to respond quickly with the right tools, monitoring and logging intrusion prevention and detection, and be ready with those tools and get alerts on their phones instantly when there is a problem and there is an intrusion detection, and be able to be trained and respond to that right away. I don't know about you, but the same person that's here to help me understand how to use my Outlook more effectively is probably not the same person that I would expect to be ready with the right tool to find a virus after an intrusion is detected and figure out how to get rid of it within a matter of minutes or hours within our organization. That's a team of people. That's a team of people for sure.
It's a lot to ask one person, or a small team of people to keep abreast with that, as well as all the other technological changes in the world. Well, good. So it sounds like, in summary, it sounds like there's some low-hanging fruit ways that companies can get started. Sounds like we not only have to worry if we're using SolarWinds, but also for using other applications. And you made a really good point that we didn't drill into a whole lot, but I think it's just worth highlighting, is that it's not just the external hackers, the professional hackers you need to worry about. It's also your internal employees. Whether it's deliberate or not, you still have to worry about what their security access is and how it might affect your security.
Absolutely. Internal insiders, employees are really one of the biggest risks that you have. And you've got external threats and internal threats as well. So understanding, what people are allowed access to, and having programs that log and detect whether they're doing something outside of the boundaries of what their role is super important too. Not only external actors, but internal actors. And that comes from a designing and maintenance and update of a very specific program. And I mean program not as an application or software, but a program in terms of just like we have programs and PMOs that oversee what gets done within an organization for all kinds of things. You really need to have a cybersecurity program. And that's the kind of thing that you would look to for MSSP, a managed security services provider, to do. And it's become such a problem, Eric. I've been on a lot of calls with our clients, and certainly other calls as well. And there's a deep concern about this, and it's started to become such a concern that we're now, involved in helping folks as part of one of our business lines to assist them in assessing what the situation is and making recommendations. So whether or not you have not yet been hacked, or you're feeling uncomfortable, if you're not using an MSSP, or you're not sure that your MSSP is doing a good job for you and you want to learn more, it's definitely worth reaching out to us. Setting up a call will help you just see, are you doing a good job? Are you doing enough? And we have fractional CISOs available, some of the best ones in the world, that can help to listen to what your answers are and your responses to how you're securing your data and systems today, and provide some guidance for you. Very similar to the kind of guidance that we provide historically at Third Stage for all kinds of other things, like your change management or your ERP, or how you govern your projects. This is a program that every company needs in terms of cybersecurity programs, and either reach out to your own MSSP, and if you don't have one or even understand what that is, then give us a call, because at least we can get you pointed in the right direction as to how to get started with a pretty extensive, but it's not terribly expensive, but it is terribly necessary for every business that's listening right now.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. Now I'll include our contact information below in the description, just so people know how to get a hold of us. And just for people that don't know what CISO is, you mentioned fractional CISOs. What exactly is that?
Right. Chief Information Security Officer.
All right, perfect. So some organizations may not be quite big enough to have that role, but it's certainly an important one that
And
we
they
can,
don't.
we can help fill.
It's a fractional CISO, and that's the way to go. You just get a person or a part of a team that you use just for a fraction of the time. You get all that knowledge and all that power, but for a small fraction to help you get your organization under control. So that's really the right way to go for small and medium-sized businesses.
Perfect. Well, thank you for your time, Daryl. Really appreciate your feedback and all the great discussion here. We appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks everybody for listening.
All right, we'll be right back.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Wow, so that was interesting. If we weren't already terrified in the first part of the conversation, now I don't know about you, but I'm even more scared now.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's interesting because she called this a global event that marks the beginning of a new era. I mean, that just gives me goosebumps thinking here we are in this new digital phase where this could be if we are looking at war, it could be all cyber related, right? And one thing I'm curious to get your thoughts on, but the intention behind this hack to get sensitive data such as like defense info, obviously, I guess that's a given, but info on vaccines and things of that nature. I mean, that's very interesting to think, they're not just looking for people's credit cards or looking to get money. They're looking to get the deep foundational data that makes the United States the United States.
Yeah, and that is scary. I mean, us being in the United States is, we might feel it a little bit more directly, but even though, most of our audience is not in the United States, they're in other parts of the world. I mean, anyone's fair game, I guess, is, my takeaway here. It's not just a U.S. thing, and certainly the SolarWinds hacks seem to target the U.S. government in many ways and vaccines and things like that, like you mentioned, but it just goes to show that, if that could be hacked, then, what does that mean to the average mom and pop, mid-size or small business, that has cybersecurity needs or risks?
Exactly. And I mean, there's just so many layers to this that I didn't even realize existed. You have, you can change your passwords. Yeah, you can have VPN, do, all of these different, things that you think will kind of be your safety net. And then they come in through the back door and try to get your data that way. So I guess, just being aware and conscientious of what's at risk, what data is sensitive, and making sure you're protecting that. I think that's more important than it has ever been in our lifetimes or any time in history.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you there. I'm excited for the next guest that we have on the show, but just one last thing before we do that, Paresa, as we look ahead to 2021, I know we've talked about some of the trends and some of the lessons learned from 2020, but it's worth noting that you have something to be excited about in 2021 beyond, the usual stuff that we're all excited about, like Cobra Kai, and, we already just talked about that. And I know you're super excited to really get into Cobra Kai now, but you have some other, changes to your family situation that are exciting to look forward to, right?
Right. Yeah. We're getting ready to welcome our second baby girl coming in March. So we're going to be a family of 4 over here, which will be very exciting. We're all very excited. I'm nervous to go from 1 to 2, but it's going to be great, I'm sure.
Yeah. They have someone to keep each other company now, and as they get older, they'll take a lot of the pressure off you and your husband.
That's right. Exactly. Maybe they can be buddies and keep each other occupied while mom tries to get work done. But no, we're very excited. We have our first son. His name is Xander. He is just a ball of energy. So definitely never a dull moment there. And he is so excited to bring a baby sister into the world. So it's definitely an exciting time for our family, and just, how we're juggling life, finding the balance, you know?
Very cool. That's exciting. So I guess, we need to talk about who's going to fill in for you in this podcast, while you're out with maternal leave. So we'll have to take that offline, I suppose. Now, how old's your son?
He is 2.5. He actually just started preschool, which is crazy. So he goes to half-day preschool, which is exciting, making new friends. But yeah, he's growing like a weed over here. I can't even believe it. He wakes up in the morning and he's like 2 inches taller. It's wild. Yeah, and you know all about it. Your kids are a little bit older than mine, right? That's why they love Cobra Kai so much.
Yeah, they're two sons, 14 and 11. So they're right in the sweet spot, of the Cobra Kai, the younger demographic there. But it is fun, and having that, they're about 2.5 years apart, which sounds like will be the same case with your kids. It's good because they're close enough to where they can still get along and not kill each other too often. So that makes it.
That's reassuring. I hope I can say the same thing.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, congratulations. That's something else to look forward to here in 2021.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm excited to bring on our next guests. We have Nate Stroher and Braden Gerbig from Third Stage Consulting. And like I said before, we're going to talk today about a case study into a large medical device manufacturer that we're working with to help them with their digital strategy and their roadmap for 2021 and beyond. Nate and Braden, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
You bet. So we wanted to talk a bit about a current client engagement we're working on. And you two in particular are among the team from Third Stage working on this engagement. It's a digital transformation strategy type of project. So we can't talk client names or real specifics around client-sensitive types of information, but I would like to talk about and ask you guys some questions about this project and what some of the different nuances of helping this particular client define their digital strategy. But before we get to that, maybe you could tell us a little bit about this client. What is it they do? How many employees do they have? What industry are they in? Maybe just give us a quick overview, if you don't mind.
Okay. Yeah, I'll jump in and take that. We have a client that's a large medical device manufacturer with several over 40 different divisions within the organization. They came to us. Their specific division had around 40,000 employees, and they came to us hoping to have a little bit different project than we normally do. They came to us for advice and to guide them through a transformation project that didn't so much look at a specific platform, but help them get a technology strategy around a more of a client and customer focus view of the technology that we were going to help them with.
Great. Yeah, and as we get into the new year here in 2021, that's one of the things we wanted to chat with you guys about is just what are some of the lessons we can take away and the audience can take away as they're defining their digital transformation strategies for the new year. So maybe help us understand what was the scope of the work we've done so far with this client in terms of defining the digital transformation strategy and our role in that. Maybe just help us understand that situation.
Yeah, why don't I start off and I'll give you a little high level and then Braden can get a little more specific. But like I mentioned earlier, this client really wanted to have a focus less on a certain platform or a certain technology, but more on an end-to-end process. So they came to we traditionally get a call where someone will ask us, hey, I want to replace my ERP package, my CRM package, or an HCM package. This client actually came to us and said, I can get that answer fairly quickly. What I want you guys to help me with is that end-to-end process and really focus on one certain aspect of our business where we can look at the best technology available today, but more so available in the future that's going to enhance this entire experience. And I'll let Braden explain a little more how we went about that.
Sure. Thanks, Nate. We really did look at end-to-end primarily from a customer perspective. So historically, the company hasn't been focused on the customer experience in terms of systems or strategy. So we use that as a starting point, really, to build our overall strategy, focus on the customer, and how do we enhance the systems, kind of a blue sky, if you will, in terms of what systems can we improve, processes, people, et cetera, in order to improve the overall customer experience. So it really started at the beginning of the business from an integrated planning standpoint all the way through to delivery and handling any kind of after delivery challenges such as returns or customer interaction. So it touched on all the major systems in and around the ERP, and we considered all options during the process.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about how they weren't driven necessarily by technology or technology replacement. But one thing I don't know if you mentioned so far, but our client contact at this client is the CIO. And so, an IT person, very technical, very smart person. And what was it that led the CIO to the conclusion that we needed to not just replace the technology, but to focus on customer experience and end-to-end business processes? Was there some sort of business driver or strategic imperative or shift in the market that was leading them down this path?
Yeah, I think overall it was really to focus on the challenges that consistently presented themselves in terms of a division operating in a much larger company. So setting the strategy for that division in hopes that that strategy would continue throughout the rest of the organization. So I think I don't want to speak for the CIO, but I think he felt that there was a need to set a strategy that could be communicated consistently with other similar divisions, but also at the company level, to say that this is something that we need to continually focus on and consistently push in order to address the gaps that we currently have.
I think to just elaborate on that is twofold. To really make the one division that we were focusing on as sort of the test case, and to really work on that division and iron out the kinks and figure out how to take that to the rest of the organization. And then the second and the more important piece that Braden hit on is the really overused phrase, but to make IT more of a strategic player in the organization. And the one comment he made over and over again when we first met this client, you and I, Eric, that he said, I can go through and I can get the latest and greatest technology, and in 3 years you'll be back and we'll get the latest and greatest technology, and we'll always be playing catch up. And he said, what I want to do is I want to look at where we are now, where we want to be, and this end-to-end customer experience, and how can we position ourselves so that we're taking pieces of the technology and constantly replacing it, but it's the overall experience and it's that overall interaction that's really the driving force, not the technology getting old, replacing it, getting old, replacing it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you're alluding to another thought that I had, or question I have, or maybe it's more of a comment, in that when you and I first talked to him, Nate, I remember him saying that it was sort of a, I don't know if it was a political situation, but he wanted to proactively address the organizational dynamic of, he didn't want the global CIO or the global organization to be telling him, what his strategy and roadmap is going to be. He wanted to have a proactive solution in place that he could take to his higher ups and say, hey, here's our vision, here's our strategy, here's our roadmap for our group. And they are such a big organization where it makes sense to have different parts of the business, with potentially different strategic roadmaps. But I found that very interesting, because a lot of times people will kind of wait for the mandate to come down from the top that, hey, this is the direction we're going and this is what you need to do. But he sort of reversed that and said, well, I want to be able to take this to the executive team and to the global team and say, this is my vision. And, there might be some reconciliation that would need to happen, but he wanted to get ahead of that, which I found very, very interesting. Now, I know this wasn't about technology replacement per se, but there obviously is a technology component in what we were evaluating when we were defining the overall strategy and roadmap for the transformation. But what was the lay of the land of the technical environment. I mean, what situation are they in right now that they're looking for help migrating away from?
Well, there's a number of systems that we evaluated. The ERP primarily looking at SAP as the legacy, and then a number of both homegrown and off-the-shelf applications as well, in terms of customer ordering, planning, manufacturing, logistics, etc. There was quite a number of systems. Really, the challenge was tying those systems together within the larger organization and getting those systems to follow the strategy, which is handling a number of different manufacturing locations, logistical locations, all of those different offices and divisions and everything else working in conjunction with the larger organization.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So fairly complex environment, fairly complex landscape that they're in now, and with the shifting market and their view and their focus on end-to-end processes and customer experience, it sounds like there was a lot for us as a team to be thinking about as we evaluated and helped define this roadmap. As we were going through this exercise, and as we've been going through this exercise so far with this client, what are some of the interesting takeaways or observations or surprises that you came across in this project so far?
Yeah, I think for me in general, it was just simplifying the landscape. The business is very complex. Just as a template, the business is complex. So trying to simplify the systems landscape in a complicated environment was probably the biggest challenge. How do we do more with less, more consistently? And do we consider other systems to migrate to, or do we keep what we have and clean it up? But overall, just the simplification, I think, of systems in general was probably the thing that was the most aha moment for us in terms of making the customer experience better.
And I think Braden and I talked about this earlier today. I think the one thing that made us real successful with this client was the ability to really take and boil things down to very simple buckets, for lack of a better phrase, to say, how can we make sure that we're doing what we need to do to the best of our ability today? And that's one bucket. And then the other bucket is, how can we start to think strategically, and what are the things that we need to be doing in the future to make us a strategic driver within the organization? And then literally taking it, and you can always break down the divisions, but we simply looked at it as people, process, and technology. And again, there's 1,000 different classifications you can make, but really trying to put everything into that bucket so that every time you go to the client, you can say, here's where we stand on these three areas, and these are our, doing the things to the best of our ability and strategically focused. It really simplifies things, and I hate to narrow it down to just a bunch of bullets, but that really kind of is how, when you do that, you've got a methodology that you can have everyone on the same page as far as what we're doing and where we need to go.
Right. Yeah, I want to come back to that thought too on business process and technology and the complexity of their landscape. We're going to take a quick break. I want to come back to that and ask you a follow-up question, both of you, on that point. But before we do that, we'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Transformation Ground Control. We're here with Nate and Braden from the Third Stage team talking about digital transformation strategy. We'll be right back.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, Our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
All right, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Nate and Braden from Third Stage Consulting. We're talking about a current client of ours where we're helping them define their digital transformation strategy. And we wanted to cover this topic in the spirit of a new year, and a lot of organizations and teams are thinking about how they can define their strategy and roadmap and plans for the coming year or years. And when we left off, we were talking a bit about the complexity of the landscape that this current client has, and how we had addressed the process, people, and technology components of their transformation strategy. And I just wanted to build on that a little bit, and maybe I'll start with you, Braden, and ask, what are some of the core components of that digital transformation strategy that we've defined with this client? And maybe I should back up and say it's not even really necessarily a digital transformation strategy. It's more of a transformation strategy from what I'm gathering here and my understanding of this client. But what are some of the key components or the key work streams or recommendations we've made as part of that strategy for this client?
Yeah, I'd say the starting at the beginning of the process, I think looking at integrated business planning, how do we become more dynamic and flexible, managing across multiple business units on a real-time basis. That's not only from a manufacturing and forecasting perspective, but also from a systems perspective in terms of integration and some of the challenges that go along with understanding data from multiple systems at the front end, especially when we're creating a forecast for a very specialized product. So the other components along the lines of specialized product would be looking at the manufacturing process. How do we streamline and what's available system-wise to streamline that process as well, but also looking at some of the physical aspects of manufacturing in terms of plant locations and some of the overall shipping and logistics that go into getting the product to the customer. We also had a huge component in terms of customer or patient management in terms of the insurance piece of the business. So looking at some of the systems that handle claims and some of the patient processes that occurred in that cycle. So we had some creative ideas about again, simplifying the landscape and trying to keep in mind that the customer experience was the most important thing.
Right. Nate, would you add anything to that, or any other thoughts you have around that?
I think Brendan pretty much hit it, but I think again, to just kind of just take a step back and really again kind of focus on what we have to do right and making sure we're doing that the best that we're doing, and then going to the overall strategy and knowing that that's not an overnight task. So when we talk about all the things that we focused on, we're talking on a lot of these systems that we looked at for the client. They weren't going away overnight. So this was really a matter of where we are now, where we're going, and what that roadmap looks like to get to the next stage. So it's not just a matter of replace this today and put this in place tomorrow, but it's how do we get that long-term strategy in place.
So when you guys were helping define this strategy and roadmap for the client, they're in the medical device industry, as you guys mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, which in some ways is an essential business, and in other parts of the business it's non-essential. So that as far as the impact that COVID and economic uncertainty has had on this client, how has that affected the way you guys worked with this client to define that strategy and roadmap. So in other words, is this the same process and the same end result that would have happened 2 years ago, as it would be in a post-COVID world here in 2021, or how is that affected? How is the current reality of today affected that, or has it affected how you approached it?
Well, I'd say just at the team level, everything we do now is remote. So the challenge there is, not being able to walk the halls, so to speak, but rather doing everything online. But the interview process still remains the same. It's very much getting to know the client, getting to know their challenges, and translating those into our experiences and how we can best help the client.
And I think to add on that, the one thing I think we focused on, we've all heard over the last 9 months, is sort of how we're all reacting to COVID. But I think, for lack of a better way to explain it, I think the one thing we need to talk about is how we're reacting to a changing environment. So today we might be talking about not being able to go to a concrete workplace. We're going to have a lot more virtual commuting and virtual interaction. But really, kind of what does that what do things look like in the future when the next global pandemic or the next shift in technology or the next major event happens? Because we'll look back at COVID and we'll say, okay, that was a blip in the radar, and obviously you hear the phrases like there's a new norm and there's everything else, but there's going to be some other shift, be it in 1 year, 10 years, whatever, that we're going to have to react to, and how are we adapted to be able to change to that, and how quick are we on our feet technology wise to be able to take a change in the market and really adjust to it.
Yeah, I was a little disappointed to hear that you were doing this all remotely, because I myself haven't traveled in 10 months or gotten on an airplane in 10 months. So I was hoping this might be an excuse to get to travel finally, but apparently not.
No.
So no such luck there. What about the strategy itself, as far as, you talked about how we interacted with the client and how that looks quite a bit different today than it might have looked a year or two ago. But were there any material changes or considerations in the actual strategy and roadmap that we laid out for this client that is materially different because of the world we're in now, or in the post-COVID world? Or is it kind of like they're kind of marching ahead with on a trajectory that they're already heading down even before COVID hit? I mean, how's that affected the overall strategy for this client?
I think this client there was probably less of a focus with the customer on this client with one-to-one interactions. But so with this customer, or with this client, I don't think it was as focused on that. But Braden, you can probably say there was still some minor changes in their business that we did need to address because of COVID.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think, every business has been impacted by COVID and what we've had to adjust to over the past 9 months. But, I think generally speaking, you're talking about a product that gets shipped to a customer that oftentimes needs the product on either short notice or a quick term basis because of the nature of the product. And so, it's really getting better at handling the customer experience from a patient claims perspective in terms of navigating, the healthcare industry in this kind of environment. Systematically, that presents a number of challenges. But generally speaking, I think the strategy is sound regardless of current events. I think whether we were experiencing COVID or, as Nate said, some other kind of issue outside our control, the strategy would still be sound in any circumstance.
Yeah, that's a good word of wisdom, and I think it's something that it's a good lesson for a lot of clients, because I think a lot of clients we work with tend to get fixated on COVID and what are we going to do right now and how are we going to deal with remote workforces and all the nuances that are important, but it's easy to lose sight of, well, how do we back up and look at the bigger picture of what's the real lesson of the real takeaway or the real strategic imperative, which for a lot of organizations is, how do we provide a more flexible work environment, or how do we provide a more flexible customer experience that can adapt quickly to the next pandemic or the next whatever, macroeconomic or pandemic or whatever sort of curveball might get thrown the way of this client or any organization. So I think that's a good takeaway is how can we, take those lessons from 2020 and apply it to longer term thinking to give us the competencies and the capabilities we need longer term. It's good advice. What are some of the biggest challenges or, I don't want to say problems, but maybe challenges or opportunities for improvement? And I think you've alluded to some of this around customer experience and business processes and things like that. But are there any other challenges or areas of improvement that were uncovered in this process that we factored into the overall strategy and roadmap that we recommended?
Yeah, I'd say that, generally speaking, some of the takeaways or improvements are that, we need to keep the customer experience in mind as a business in terms of how does it look from the customer's perspective. I think a lot of times, or oftentimes, as systems are implemented or a company goes to market, there's a focus on, okay, we know how to deliver, and that's what we're going to do best. And sometimes, the customer sees it a different way. And I think it bears in mind whether we're making, complex medical devices or we're making, a simple widget. The customer experience is paramount to success of the company because overall, that's going to determine how we deliver, supply, build our product. And if we start at the beginning, working back towards the customer, I think that's always going to be met with success.
What closing words of wisdom would you give to our audience here today that's trying to figure out what our strategy or roadmap for our transformation is going to be in 2021? What are some of the big takeaways you have from this client that you think might apply to other organizations out there?
Well, I think really the biggest takeaways, and I think where we learned not only from this client and from this type project, but I think it really emphasized the ability and the need to take things and put them in very succinct categories and be very clear as far as what it is you're trying to accomplish and really simplify things. And our client from the beginning felt that, he recognized the fact that this could very quickly turn into a rabbit hole project where we're chasing 13 or 14 different things and we're going to spend a year and we're never really going to get an answer. So we were very fortunate in the sense that he knew the pitfalls and was able to work through them with us and was able to agree on a path that really simplified X, Y, and Z, put it in these buckets, and we'll address this, and we'll get a strategy. And then down the road, we might need to adjust the customer. We're going off of basically customer needs today and what they think they are in the future. So we're trying to give him a tool set and technology that allows him to react, because what we think the customer is going to want in the future is we're hoping that it's going to be pretty accurate for what they want, but it's not going to be the same. There is always going to be the adjustment. So I think my takeaway and third stage takeaway on all the projects that we have is really simplifying things and really keeping things at a very manageable the ability to talk through things and really have everyone on the same page for what we're trying to accomplish in very simple terms.
How about you, Braden? Anything you'd add to that, or other takeaways or words of wisdom you'd offer up to anyone that's about to go through this process?
Yeah, I think Nate said it well. If we can keep the experience simple to the point that there's an end in sight for success. I think that's always a good goal in terms of both near and long term to understand, what are we trying to achieve, and let's not get lost in the weeds. So many of our projects, have inherent complexity, and it's very easy to get tripped up on the complexity. But if you keep the end goal in mind, it's something to always refresh on every day.
Yeah, it's well put, and I think you guys said it well that the end state or the end goal wasn't necessarily or isn't necessarily in this case to implement new technology to replace the old technology. Is to figure out all that stuff we started off talking about, which is how do we make for a better customer experience, better business processes, and simplification of our environment. I mean, that's really the end goal, and it sounds like a no-brainer as we're talking about it, but I think a lot of times you guys are right. The organizations and clients we work with tend to get fixated on technology, and then they go down these rabbit holes of technical complexity and things that it's just it's not necessarily, and it's not aligned with what you're trying to accomplish necessarily as a business. So that's really good closing advice. So I want to thank you guys for being on the show here today. I really appreciate it, and just thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, thank you guys. When we come back, we'll be back with more with Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Wow, so that was another interesting conversation.
Yeah, I love it. I feel like that's just a testament to how awesome Third Stage takes care of their clients, One thing that he said that stood out to me, just because I've seen it consistently across all of our content, is this idea of 3 buckets for any digital transformation: people, processes, technology. I've heard you talk about it. I've heard Brian talk about it. So I'm curious. I mean, let's expand on that. I'm wondering what your take is on those 3 pillars and why it's so important in a digital transformation.
Well, I think the key thing is that those 3 buckets represent the big picture of of any transformation journey. And I think a lot of companies get really wrapped up or caught up in the technology piece of it, and they invest so much time just trying to figure out what in the world or what the heck the technology is or isn't going to do, that they end up forgetting about their operations and their people and the change management and that sort of thing. So I think that's important. And they also, along those same lines, I mean, Nate and Braden talked about customer experience. They mentioned that a few times about how the client is really focused on how do we enable a better customer experience. I thought that was really interesting too. A lot of companies lose sight of that in addition to the 3 buckets that you talked about.
Right. That's huge. I mean, and it's not something you necessarily think of when you're looking from the outside in, is how does your ERP system that you select, how does that trickle down to the customer experience? It's something that's internal facing, right? How does it translate to what the customer sees?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a huge thing.
I love that. And it just also goes to show that, whatever software you choose, it's setting you up to get to your 5-year, 10-year vision. It's more of a strategic play in what direction your company is going to go, because it's the foundation that you're going to go there. So I love what Braden and Nate were talking about. I mean, it sounds like they took really good care of this client, and the client was enthused about what was to come for their organization. Yeah.
The client's a very smart guy too. The CIO that they mentioned, he's a smart guy, knows his stuff, and really interesting to work with him. And he's one of those clients we learn a lot as consultants. We're always learning a lot by working with different people in different companies like that.
That's the best kind of client. I mean, another thing too that I'll note is he mentioned that, the CIO mentioned that every roughly 10 years, there's going to be a shift, whether, it's a shift in, technology making new leaps and bounds, whether it's COVID. The world is kind of unpredictable, as we learned in 2020. So what does that mean for the future? What's the next shift? What's coming?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. And that's, I suppose, why, back to the beginning of this podcast, I suppose that's why we're doing this podcast, is to help explore that answer and to help people through that journey to define what it means for them. And I think that's the key, is every organization has different, to your point, they have a different strategy, different objectives, different goals that they're trying to accomplish. And so transformation means different things to different people. And so we've got to figure out, every 10 years, if it's going to shift, what does that mean to you as an organization?
That's right. Lots to unpack there. Hopefully it'll be better than what 2020 brought us. That's for sure. I think that's all we can all hope for, that, right?
Absolutely. There's a lot of good reasons to be optimistic. Well, thank you, Paresa, for helping me fumble my way through my first podcast ever. I've never hosted a podcast before, and I know you're the pro at this. You've done this before, so thank you for being our co-host here.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me.
All right, and thank you to everyone listening. This is Transformation Ground Control. If you have suggestions for potential guests or topics, I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out. You can reach me at eric@thirdstage-consulting.com. Be sure to also follow me on Twitter, follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and also look for Third Stage on those social media platforms as well. We put out tons of content every day. Especially if you're following us on LinkedIn, that tends to be where we post a lot of our freshest content. So be sure to follow us, connect with us there. And any questions you have, any topics you'd like us to cover, if you have questions for us, we'll at some point here start doing Q&A and taking questions from the audience. So feel free to shoot me an email with any questions or suggestions you have. I'd love to hear feedback on this first episode so we can continue to make it better. Thanks again for joining, and hope you have a great day.